Good morning, friends, and welcome to another episode of PB Reads the Bible. And that would be me. I'm Pastor Brian, pastor here at Christ United Methodist Church in Waynesboro. And we are on episode 27 of our journey through Matthew. So that means we're going to be looking at chapter 27 today. We're also going to be finishing up chapter 26. I thought that this section of 26 goes extremely well with 27. It is going to make it for a long reading today, a long session, but that's okay. That's okay. I'm here for the duration, and I hope you are as well. But good morning and welcome. It is Thursday, December 30th. One more day, and the year is over. One more day, and we're done with Matthew, by the way. So we will finish this up tomorrow morning. And then go about the day and figure out what you're doing for New Year's Eve. But go ahead and check in. At the corner of my eye, I see things popping up, so I assume people are already checking in. Use the comment section of the stream to say hello, good morning, whatever it is you'd like to say. You can also shoot me a text to do the same thing, 570-351-1619. Do the same thing so that we can share what's on our hearts and minds. Keep each other surrounded in prayer, lifted in prayer. So good morning, John. All caught up. Ron's all caught up. Good morning, Ron. Good morning, Maureen. Maureen is also with us live. Good morning, Cheryl. Good to have you here. Good to see everybody this morning. I know a lot of people do have to play catch up and watch some other time because life, right? Because life happens regardless of what we might plan on doing or having happen on any particular day. Oh, good morning, Marilyn. See an F, but that's you're probably like me and hit send or enter before you actually intended to. I do that so often. I'll end up sending a message that's only half completed because I hit the button too quickly to carry it along. Yeah, it's going to be a long passage today. That's all right. A whole bunch of pages of my book here. What book is this? It's one of the commentaries that I've been using, and it's got the scripture right in there. And then if I forget something, I can kind of look it up quick. Something that I wanted to say. So anyway, what else? Announcements. Worship on Sunday, 8:15 and 10:45, both in person. 10:45 is also live streamed, so you can join us for that. Facebook, YouTube, website, all that kind of thing. It is the first Sunday of the month. It's the first Sunday of the year. So anyone who attends worship on Sunday will have perfect attendance for the year. The bishops, as I mentioned, have granted grace and extended their permission to do distance or online communion. They use the word virtual. I don't like the word virtual. Just distance communion. So if you're joining us online, please have, feel free to have a cracker or bread, juice or wine ready for when we get to that point in the worship. Jan, good morning, Marcia. It is one of those days. I was up bright and early, but it still felt like I was moving in slow motion. Almost to the point I was afraid I was going to be late. I wasn't. Woo-hoo. Actually been here for a while. Stopped over to see some of the kids. I haven't seen them in a couple days because they're on school break, so I haven't had to drive the vans or anything. But went next door to see the little ones, and then I went downstairs to see the school agers, the ones that that won't show up because it's green. I forgot about that. The kids they're awesome. They're pretty excited to see me. The one little girl comes running from across the room, gives me a big hug on that. And the other one has this little cutout card that says, "Wishing you the merriest Christmas and all the best in the new year." She has it for all the teachers, all the staff, but specifically for PB. It came with 2 pieces of candy. The candy are no longer here. Anyway, okay, fine. Back caught up. Thanks be to God. Great. Good to have you back there, Marilyn. We love that. We love that. All right. So we're going to be looking at the ending of chapter 26 and then carrying through to 27. I did say tomorrow is the last day for Matthew. I'm still debating about a couple things as far as what to do next and when we'll be starting it. I'm not sure if we'll start it on Monday or if we'll wait a week or something like that. Maybe take a week's break. Although then, of course, there's things going on the following week that might mess things up. So I have to look at a couple different things, and I will let you know for sure tomorrow morning what the plan is for reading the Bible. Speaking of reading the Bible, in addition to reading it here every day, I try to read it every day using my cell phone, using an app called YouVersion, or the Bible app. It used to be called YouVersion. I think it's called kind of both. And I use a daily reading plan. That way I don't have to figure it out. They tell me what to read. And you end up reading through the whole Bible in 1 year, in pieces. You read a few chapters. Usually it's between 4 and 6 chapters a day. And it's usually split over a couple different types of readings. Most of the plans cover something from what we would call wisdom literature, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, something from somewhere else in the Old Testament, and then also something from the New Testament, either a gospel or an epistle, sometimes both. Oh, it should have included in the wisdom literature Song of Songs as well. And there's usually a devotional or some sort of a reading sort of theme for the day, helps you with that. I know I had a few people following along with the same reading plan that I was doing this year. And they asked me, what are we doing next year? Are you doing anything? So I invite you to check that out. You can actually go to my personal page and scroll down through, pass by some of my bad jokes and stuff like that. And you'll see, join me for reading the Bible, or send me a message, either text or email, and I will send you the link if you're interested in to join me in next year's reading. And it's called the Reformation reading plan. It was created by the Lutheran Church somewhere out in the Midwest, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember now exactly where. So I'll be using that one for next year. So if you want to join me for that, but that's not where we're at today. So shut up, PB, and read the Bible. We're going to be starting with chapter 26, verse 57. That's because we left off yesterday with 56. So we're going to be starting with 57. However, I'm going to answer a question or clarify something. Someone sent me a message that they were a little confused. And it deals with verse 56. Excuse me a sec. I did get a yes. Well, good morning, Pat. Good to have you with us this morning. So someone was confused a little bit by something, and it's because of verse 56. They said confused about prophets. Confused about prophets. Cool. In the past, you and others explained prophets were not seeing the future, but were telling about something that already happened. In verse 56, it says writings of prophets to be fulfilled. So maybe you could explain that a little bit. I'd be happy to. So to clarify a couple different things. Prophets don't usually predict the future, especially not future in the long distance, the far distant future. The only time prophets predict the future, quote unquote, the future, it's only a year or two in advance, maybe. And it's because things are happening now that they can see the consequences coming. And God gives them a message about what those consequences are going to be. And sometimes the consequences are good. Sometimes the quote unquote prediction is good from that point of view. Now, prophets don't usually, talk about things in their past as far as a prediction. There's a little bit of confusion on that point, I think. And I'm going to apologize because it was probably something I said wrong at some point. And I'm going to say it was during Daniel. Daniel isn't exactly a prophet. We can look at his book as, we can look at that book as a prophet, but it sits within the realm of prophets when you talk about the breakdown of the Bible structurally. It falls into that category that way. But there's debate about whether or not Daniel should be, because there's debate about whether or not writers of apocalyptic literature should be considered prophets, because that's not what they're trying to do. They're not, the job of a prophet is to speak for God, And writers of apocalyptic literature aren't exactly doing that. They typically write about things that have already happened or are happening right now, but in a way to make it look like they're predicting it, as if they're writing about the future, when in fact they're writing about the past. For instance, the authors of Daniel were living in one time, but were pretending to be writing as if they were living in a time a few hundred years before that. And their predictions were actually about events that had taken place before they lived, or were happening right at the time that they're living. And eventually write about things that happened after, that are actually in their future. But when you look at that progression, not only from Daniel, but Revelation and other Jewish apocalyptic literature, you see that their predictions of the past are 100% accurate. Their predictions of the present are very accurate. But their predictions of the future, immediate future, pretty close. A couple of years from now, well, not quite so good. 3 years from now, not at all. Not at all. So there's the difference. Prophets write about current, like what's happening exactly right now, and their predictions, as it were, might be about something just into the future. Okay, so I hope that clears up the difference, first of all, between a prophet and a writer of apocalyptic literature, and this idea of predicting the future and past and all that kind of stuff. Hopefully. If not, please let me know. Now, what is that? Understanding that, let's take a look at that verse 56 to see what the question is about. Verse 56 says, "But all this has taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled." Boom. Which does make it sound like the prophets were predicting everything that was happening to Jesus. We can look at that from a couple different ways. First of all, we can look at it from the point of view that Matthew may actually have thought that the prophets predicted the future. I don't think he necessarily thought that. But what he did do was use some of the prophets to show them predicting the future, even though they weren't. And he did that by taking some of their statements out of context. For instance, the beautiful passage, lovely passage that we say, do we read it on Christmas Eve? No, I think whenever we read it, this shall be the sign: a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall name him Emmanuel. Boom. So Matthew uses that, and we look at that and we say, oh, we're talking about Mary giving birth to Jesus. Boom, it's a prediction of the Messiah. Jesus fits this perfectly. However, this is, we might say that Matthew is proof texting when he does stuff like that. Proof texting is taking a single verse out of its natural habitat, out of where it appears in Scripture, and reading it, and thereby allowing its meaning to be changed to fit your situation or to back up what you're trying to say. When we look back at the initial, when we look back at that passage within its narrative context, within its written context in Isaiah, and read a few verses before and a few verses after, we see that this is a message from Isaiah to the king at the time, speaking about something that was going to take place at their time. He said, he even gives it a timeline. I think he says, by this time next year, you will receive a sign. A young woman will conceive and bear a son, is actually what Isaiah says. Sometimes we translate it as virgin, but the Hebrew is closer to young woman. But Matthew goes with the other meaning and changes it to virgin. And we continue to read, but he shall bear a son, and you shall call him Emmanuel. By the time he is weaned, by the time he's old enough, whatever, so in only a few years, the people that you are afraid of, this empire that's right outside your gates that you are afraid of, will be gone. So it's speaking about that. So Matthew tends to grab something from the prophets and make it fit the context of Jesus. Now, what could be that's one way of explaining it. The other thing is, and there's a passage in Isaiah, a fairly lengthy passage in Isaiah called speaks about the suffering servant. Chapters 51, 52, 53, something like that, includes at least some of those chapters. And when we read them and we look at Jesus, he definitely fits the description. However, that author, which would have been Isaiah number 3, wasn't using that as a messianic. It was not a messianic prophecy. We have made it into a messianic prophecy. It was not initially. And Jews today do not consider it to be a messianic prophecy, prediction about the Messiah. They see it as speaking to Israel, and as that's how Israel should live. But when we look at it as Jesus fits the description of this suffering servant extremely well. Now, is that because Matthew shapes him to be that way? We're going to look at that because throughout Jesus's trial, he really exemplifies the idea of the suffering servant, because part of that passage from Isaiah was that he would be silent before his adversaries. So he really truly does fit that description. Not that it was. So I hope that helps. So Jesus can fulfill a prophet without it really being a prophecy, I guess, is partially what I'm trying to say. I hope that helps. Let me know if it doesn't. You might end up more confused. I can, even through the computer, I can see the eyes glazing over. So let's get on to it, shall we? 57. Jesus has just been arrested. 57. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, in whose house the scribes and the elders had gathered. But Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And going inside, he sat with the guards in order to see how this would end. Pause. So we've got the two scenes being set up, the stage being set. Okay, good. It helped. Yay. We can talk further about that sometime. So we can see Matthew is kind of doing another one of those sandwiches, and he's going to be going back and forth between two scenes. And so they're kind of juxtaposed against each other, and it's for a purpose, to show, look for the differences. We've got Jesus being taken to this trial in the fancy place, Caiaphas. Peter is outside in the courtyard with like nobody's kind of thing. Now the chief priests, back inside. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for false testimony against Jesus so that they might put him to death, but they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last, two came forward and said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days." Pause. See what Matthew's doing here. The council and the chief priests, they were looking for false witnesses. They weren't looking for truth. They were looking for false witnesses, and couldn't find any. Finally, 2 people come forward and give true testimony. Whether or not they actually heard Jesus say it, we know, and Matthew is saying, and his readers know, that Jesus did whatever, have the power to destroy the temple. Chose not to, but could if he wanted to, and rebuild it. So they were looking for false witnesses. They end up finding true witnesses. They end up finding the truth, even though they didn't want it. The high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But Jesus was silent. Here's that, silent before his adversaries, just like a sheep before her shearers. Then the high priest said to him, "I put you under oath before the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so." Kind of that "you said it" that Jesus used with Judas just a few hours earlier. "But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spat in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who is it that struck you?" Pause. So they're trying to, they're saying, if you're a prophet, if you're the Messiah, then you tell us who it is that's hitting you. That's hitting you. But Jesus remained silent through the whole thing. In other words, he is again fulfilling that prophecy, showing himself to be the suffering servant, showing himself to be a Messiah, showing himself to be a prophet by not doing what they want. There was something I should have mentioned back in verse 57, that word "gathered." Matthew's used that word a few different times. And in Greek, it's synagogo, which is related to the word synagogue. It's the verb version of synagogue. And so it seems that Matthew is using that because he was having trouble in that first century church. They were having trouble with the religious leaders from the synagogues. So whenever he uses that word "gathered," there's that like almost evil connotation to it. I forgot to mention that to you. Sorry, someone calling, don't know who you are, you're gonna have to wait. Leave me a message, please. Continuing, now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. Okay, so we've gone from the high priest, from the palace, Jesus, 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 the high priest challenging Jesus to make an oath, to say these things. Sorry, Dave, you're gonna have to wait. And now we go, he's silent, and now we go outside to Peter. So we go outside to Peter. Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A servant girl came to him and said, "You also were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before all of them, saying, "I do not know what you are talking about." When he went out to the porch, another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again, he denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." After a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Certainly, you are also one of them, for your accent betrays you." Then he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know the man." At that moment, the cock crowed. Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said, "Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Pause. So again, the this dichotomy between the juxtaposition between these two situations. Jesus being questioned, remaining silent. Peter being questioned and denying Jesus, answering with denials. Not only answering with denials, but answering with oaths. Like swearing, I don't know the guy, and answering with a curse. And in the Greek, it does. We don't get it in the English. We don't get it in the English. The NIV says, called down curses on himself. However, the Greek can also be translated, and because of the passive, indicative, and all that kind of stuff, which I don't understand, because it's all Greek to me. In the Greek, a better understanding would be that he called down a curse on Jesus, that he cursed Jesus, not himself. Is this the same Peter the rock? Yes, it is. that would be the same Peter, right? That would be the same Peter, the one that said, hey, I'll follow you all the way. You are the Messiah, the Son of God. Jesus said, you're the rock on whom I will build the church. Remember, we said that being the rock was great, but the rock isn't the one that does the building. Jesus is doing the building. And Jesus is still going to use that rock, the rock, to build the church. Why? Because of that last half of verse. He went out and wept bitterly. He realized that he had done wrong. Peter is a wonderful example, actually. We say, oh, yeah, he denied Jesus 3 times. Yeah, he denied Jesus 3 times. Something that probably many of us do, perhaps without even knowing it. Perhaps without even knowing it. But I don't know. Okay. Perhaps without even knowing it. Peter saw it, realized it, repented. And we see, of course, that there is true repentance. We see that there's true repentance. But he went out and wept bitterly, showing his sorrow for having done wrong. And so he is able to continue to be used as the rock. Just got a text from Pastor Dave that Richard Benchoff passed away, went to meet with the Lord today. So Cheryl, you'll be getting a message from Dave about putting that out on the prayer chain. And I should have said this earlier. I know I mentioned last week. Yeah, I mentioned last week sometime a friend of mine who I discovered that his eldest son committed suicide on my friend's birthday. Today is their memorial service, their funeral, their celebration of his life. So I would ask for prayers for the Siska family, And now we add to that the family of Richard Benchoff. So let's just have a moment. Let's take a moment. Hi, God, we praise you for life. We praise you for death. We praise you for life after death, all available to us through Jesus, through your Son and your amazing grace. We ask for your presence to be with the Siska family as they say goodbye, as they remember their son, Stephen. And we praise you and give you thanks for the life of Richard Benchoff, and who we trust you have welcomed into your presence with those amazing words. Well done, good and faithful servant. But be with his family, not only today, but throughout the coming days. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right. Sometimes taking breaks is important, right? I know, we didn't even get through chapter 26. We're just finishing up chapter 26. Didn't even start 27. Wow. And it's already 9:30. Told you it was going to be a long one today. All right. And yeah, so it could mean, and probably does mean, that Peter cursed Jesus, not himself. That's how kind of far he had fallen with this story. But he went out and wept bitterly. Continuing, when morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus in order to bring about his death. Again, still not looking for truth, just looking for his death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. We usually translate that governor and procurator as one of the other things that gets changed to. Other studies, the historical documentation refers to him as a prefect, which is probably not exactly a governor, but sort of in charge, and mostly in charge of keeping the peace. And so we don't really know a whole lot about that and how that whole thing worked. Some things, some of the Gospels say that they had to take him. I think it's John in particular that they say, the religious people say, oh, we brought him before you because he must be put to death. Our law says he should be put to death, but we don't have the authority to do that. Which seems to be John trying to put a little bit more blame on the Romans. It makes sense that there are other things that say that the Jewish leaders would have had the proper authority to have Jesus executed, but that they needed Pilate to actually do it, that they couldn't do it themselves. They could sentence him to death, but they kind of needed Pilate to do it. So we're not 100% sure how much approval or authority they would have had to have done it without Pilate. So whatever, continuing. When Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. Pause, which is a little odd because they're supposed to be all gathered together and with Pilate, but it seems they're in two places at the same time. Judas seems to be doing what he was supposed to do. Excuse me, especially, biblically, scripturally, religious law. Saw that he had done something wrong, tries to make amends, takes the money back, repents. Matthew does use a different word for repent. People put a lot of emphasis on that fact, that it's a softer meaning. It's really not. It's the same thing. It's just a different way of saying it. And he uses the same word elsewhere, and also in a good context. So that doesn't seem to be the issue. But he confesses his sin, knows that he had done something wrong against somebody who was innocent, and all that. So why then does he not? Why does the story go the way it does? Let's find out. He said, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. But they said, what is that to us? See to it yourself. Throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said, it is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since they are blood money. After conferring together, they used them to buy the potter's field as a place to bury foreigners. For this reason, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one on whom a price had been set, on whom some of the people of Israel had set a price. And they gave them for the potter's field as the Lord commanded me. Pause. Itchy nose. Ooh. So Judas seems to be doing everything he's supposed to do. Repents of his sin, recognizes what he's done wrong, confesses, repents, gives back the money. But he doesn't seem to be forgiven, we might almost say, right? His story doesn't end well. He goes and kills himself. Couple things. So why did all this happen? Well, some people say, well, it's because he killed himself. Well, maybe, but probably not because of why you think that. Most people that say that think that because they think that that suicide is a terrible sin that you can't come back from, obviously, and can't be forgiven for. It's interesting that we're reading this just after I mentioned again my friend's son committing suicide. I would say that it's because he committed suicide he was unable to be forgiven, and why his story ends differently because he didn't go back to the other disciples. We know, because we've read the rest of the story and we've read other stories as well, that Peter goes back to the group, to this family, to this support system that he has, and does receive grace, is given grace, is offered forgiveness. We can only assume or presume that had Judas done that, had Judas gone back to the group, had Judas waited a couple days and seen the rest of the story, that he also would have received the forgiveness that he needed, and his story would have ended differently. Back to suicide. Suicide in the first century and before that and after that was not looked at as badly as it is in other times, especially throughout the 20th century and probably the 19th century. And there's still stigma attached to it. The people, they call people quitters and all that. It was actually looked at as an honorable death, an honorable way to die, an honorable way to end things was through suicide. That's Jewish, that's early Christian, and it's other religions and non-religions as well. Pagans and Gentiles would have felt the same way. What was Jeremiah verse 9 referring to originally? I'd have to go back and reread Jeremiah, but that was a promise from, I believe that was a promise from God, a way of demonstrating that although Israel is going to be going through exile, they would be able to come back to the land. And so go and buy this field. Go and buy this field. Matthew actually, I think Matthew is mixing a couple different things, because if you look at your footnotes, it lists not only Jeremiah, but also Zechariah, and some also mention Isaiah. So he seems to be mixing a couple different things together. But Jeremiah's, if I'm not mistaken, and I certainly could be, I'd have to go back and reread that. It was a way of demonstrating that, well, kind of all is not lost for Jerusalem. Go and buy this land. Why would you go and buy land if you knew that the place was going to be completely destroyed and gone forever? So it was a promise from God that although bad stuff is happening, and although many of you are going to be taken into exile, you're still, this land will be yours again. This land will be yours again. Got it? Cool. Back to suicide again. A lot of people have that misperception, and I'm going to say somewhat that it's at least continued by television and movies. Probably, it's not where it originated, I'm sure, but continued, that suicide is a sin, and anybody who commits suicide is going to hell, and cannot be buried in a Roman Catholic cemetery. And at one time, maybe not even in a Protestant cemetery, people would have said that. That's not true. That's not true. That's just for the movies. That may have been true at one time. Not that suicide was this unforgivable sin and you're going straight to hell, but the idea of not being able to have a valid and holy funeral, that a Roman Catholic priest would not say those words over you, and you would not be able to be buried in a Roman Catholic cemetery or anything like that. That may have been true, but it hasn't been for hundreds of years. at least 100 years, if not longer, kind of thing. All right. Um, so continuing, moving along. Verse 11. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You say so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many accusations they make against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Matthew's really making Pilate out to be a pretty decent guy. Pilate, as opposed to the chief priests and stuff, is actually asking questions and looking for truth. And he's not accepting the charges right off, like on strictly on the surface. He wants to ask questions and find out. And he thinks he knows that it's these religious leaders. Now, at the festival, the governor was accustomed to release a prisoner for the crowd, anyone whom they wanted. Pause. Outside of the stories in the Gospels, this practice is not listed anywhere in any historical document. And in fact, it really doesn't make sense. Why would they want to release a political prisoner during the time of a festival when extra, thousands and thousands of extra people are in the city? So it probably wasn't an actual thing. It was probably something that was told in order to point out something, especially by Matthew, because Matthew adds a word or two to Mark, and they're kind of important. Continuing. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Jesus Barabbas. So after they had gathered, there's that word again, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Jesus Barabbas, or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that innocent man, for today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what should I do with Jesus who is called the Messiah?" All of them said, "Let him be crucified." Then he asked, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." Then the people as a whole answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." Pause. Okay. So if the release of the prisoner didn't happen, why is that story here? It really has to do with the name. It really has to do with the name. Barabbas. Barabbas means son of his father, son of a father. And we know Jesus to be son of the Father. So there's that play on words, because Barabbas, also included in that, would normally have the father's name. His doesn't, because they don't know. It's like they don't know who his father was. Son of somebody. And Matthew adds the name Jesus in front of it. Jesus Barabbas. Presumably Matthew. Sometimes it's not in some of the old texts as well, but somebody chose to add Jesus Barabbas. God saves, son of a father, and it's the son of a father who gets released, while the son of the father who gets executed. Now, a character reappears on stage, and as the character of the crowds. We haven't seen them in a while. We haven't heard from them in a while. Remember, they were potential disciples. And Jesus spent a bunch of time talking with them as well as his disciples with his final discourse in the courts of the temple, where they stayed behind while Jesus and his disciples left not only the temple, but the city of Jerusalem. Now they're back again, and it would seem that their choice has been made. They're on the wrong side of history. They're on the wrong side of the story at this point. These potential disciples, they have now turned. They've taken their stance, and they are on the side of the religious leaders, the chief priest and temple officials, and they are going to support them. Even though Pilate gives them the chance to recant, to say something other than that, they answer right along with the religious leaders. Give us Barabbas and kill this guy instead. Pilate gets this message from his wife, divine revelation, don't do anything with that guy. And Pilate is concerned, worried by it. And then he goes through that thing of washing his hands, which is just symbolic. It's a symbolic thing, but it's his way, it's Matthew's way of saying that he's not responsible, that the responsibility is really on everybody else, which they claim. The crowds say, let the condemnation be on us and on our children. Now that verse there has been misused for centuries to blame all Jews, and as a defense for unbelievably atrocious practices against Jews for hundreds of years, saying that they're responsible for Jesus's death. The crowd takes the blame for themselves and their children. This is Matthew's way, which would be Matthew's generation, or right around Matthew's generation, the generation on whom the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem occurred during their time. So that would have been seen as the punishment. So for Jesus's death by the Jews, that would have been seen as punishment, the destruction of the temple. And that's not just Matthew saying that, but that was other writers, and that is how they would have felt, especially the strongest religious leaders, that it was condemnation for something. And Matthew's saying that this is what it's the condemnation for. And it's the beginning of the parousia, we might say. Continuing. So he released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Now the flogging, the Gospels don't go into a whole lot of detail. They don't go into graphic detail because there's no need for it. There's no need for it. I never saw the whole film, The Passion of Christ by Mel Gibson. I never saw the whole film because I was not interested in it, because everything I saw, everything I read, everything I heard was how graphic it was. In fact, a colleague, a fellow pastor, different denomination, doesn't matter, said it's all violence and no grace, no love. It only concentrates on what humans did to Jesus, and there's not enough on what God does for humans through Jesus. Anyway, so they just use very broad strokes. Punishment took place. They flogged Jesus, which was terrible. Whip made with leather straps, often with little pieces of metal or bone in it to really tear the skin. That's what flogging was. And the other Gospels also refer to flogging as having taken place, but many of them have Jesus flogged first, then the trial and the sentence, and then the execution. Matthew's has probably a better order of how it goes. Trial and sentence, punishment through the flogging, followed by the execution. That makes more sense, especially historically, and looking at how things were done. But again, nice broad strokes. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, the praetorium, and they gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. And after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." They spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him. Pause. So virtually everything that they do to Jesus is what they would do to a king, only in a mocking way. Only in a mocking way. They put on a scarlet robe. So other translations or other passages, I think Mark and maybe Luke says purple robe. Well, purple would have been an emperor's robe. Where are these guys going to get a purple robe, right? So Matthew changes it to scarlet, red, which is probably easier and more likely if for them to do and have, because they would have had red material and capes and stuff like that. So they put a red robe on him. That makes more sense than purple, friends. Makes more sense than purple. But a king would wear a robe. They put a crown on his head. Not only is it a crown, yes, it's a crown of thorns and would be painful, but also the thorns would give that appearance of rays coming out of it, which is how crowns looked at the time, right? You depicted that way in pictures and art, another artwork. They have like rays of the sun coming off of it, so that would look that way. They put it on his head. They put a reed in his hand, which I think is an addition by Matthew. But that would be the scepter. That would be the scepter in his hand, and knelt before him. He would kneel before a king. They mocked him. You would say, "Hail, king!" But they're doing all of it in a mocking tone and mocking ways. But each and everything is what you would do for a king, except for obviously the striking the king with the thing. Then they led him away to crucify him. As they went out, they came upon a man from Cyrene named Simon. They compelled this man to carry his cross. Again, nice broad strokes onto how everything took place and where it goes. They never actually give an accurate description of exactly where it takes place. So we don't know, in spite of the fact that some people say they did. But I think it was Charlemagne's mother, as it went on a Holy Land trip and said, "Oh, this is where it took place." She decided several different things while she was in that area. I think it was her. It was somebody's mother. So it's this Simon from Cyrene, who Mark says is the father of Alexander and Rufus. Matthew gets rid of that because he doesn't know who they were. Those names were important for Mark's audience. They're not important for Matthew's audience. Nobody knows them, so there's no need to mention them at this time. When they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his clothes among themselves by casting lots. Then they sat down there and kept watch over him. Over his head, they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then 2 bandits were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and elders, were mocking him, saying, "He saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross now, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he wants to, for he said, 'I am God's son.'" The bandits who were crucified with him also taunted him in the same way. So we don't really know exactly where the crucifixion took place, in spite of what they might tell you if you go to Israel. Mark and Matthew differ on something there with the drink. Mark has it as a response to Jesus saying, "I thirst," and giving, and or I think that's, no, sorry, different one, Brian, different one, that they offer him wine mixed with myrrh, which would have been that anesthetic, trying to numb things or whatever. But Jesus refuses it, which some say was because he wanted to feel everything. to make it completely efficacious. I don't know that that's necessary. Possible. Now here he does take a sip, but it's mixed with gall, so it's sour wine. It's not out of concern for him. It's not out of a concern to try to numb his pain or ease his thirst. They want to. This is one more way of torturing him, giving him this vinegar wine, sour wine. And the two bandits. Now, although it's translated bandits here and translated bandits elsewhere, when Jesus said, "Am I a bandit?" Slightly different Greek word, very similar Greek word, letter-wise and even pronunciation, I'm sure, but slightly different. I did say the other one usually refers or often refers to a freedom fighter, a revolutionary. This one slightly different, but similar word isn't usually used for that. It does mean the bandit, thief, but someone who does it often with violence, uses violence to commit their crimes. They're not white-collar criminals. These guys are hardened criminals, we would say, and Jesus is crucified with them. Another difference is in other tales, Luke's version, we have the one sticking up for Jesus and being quote unquote saved. Here they're both mocking Jesus. We don't see any repentance from either of them. They both taunted him from noon on. This is the first time that in a while anyway that Matthew specifies a time. He's not concerned about time or how long it is. From noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. Pause. And the Greek is vague. When it says the whole land, could be, is Matthew saying it became dark over that area or everywhere? Considering Matthew's use of supernatural occurrences within nature, it might indicate, it might be that he was trying to say that it was like a worldwide eclipse kind of thing, that it was dark everywhere until 3 p.m. So for 3 hours, all day, you might say. Which again, we could look back to an echo to the story in Exodus with darkness, with the plague of darkness taking place. In about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Pause. Now that is the opening line to Psalm 22, where the psalmist is lamenting an apparent disconnect from God. However, the psalm does go on to praise God and to believe that God has not abandoned the person, and in fact will include Gentiles in God's love. So we can see that and maybe think that Jesus is saying that, but we can also say that Jesus was experiencing pain. This is a fully human response. Why have you abandoned me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, this man is calling for Elijah. At once, one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. Pause. Now, the reader knows, because Matthew has pointed it out, Elijah has already come, and they did not see him. Remember, those were Jesus's words, or did not recognize him, so I should say. Those were Jesus's words. Elijah has come, but they did not recognize him. Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After his resurrection, they came out of the tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now, when the centurion and those with him who were keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified and said, truly, this man was God's son. Many women were also there, looking on from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee and had provided for him. Among them were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. Pause. Pause. There's a lot to take place, right? So again, not a whole lot of details to the crucifixion. Thank you, Matthew, for that. But give us a couple of details about it. And now he starts to talk about what happens after. I say Matthew is the gospel on steroids, or the gospel in sense around, because he's the one that throws in these things about earthquakes and all these things happening, and tombs opening up and bodies being raised. However, notice that they don't leave their tombs until after the resurrection. They don't leave their tombs until after the resurrection. So what it seems to be is that Matthew is saying that the resurrection power that God has and offers virtually can't be controlled. That even precedes itself, we almost might say. The resurrection action that God is going to take, in a number of hours, 28 hours, whatever it's going to be, when God actually raises Jesus, the Son, from the dead. The resurrection power is kind of preceding itself and is already starting to raise other people. And yes, the veil is torn from the top to bottom, and it's an extremely thick veil, curtain in the temple, and that's significant and symbolic in a whole bunch of different ways. One of which is this, the no longer a need for it, that we don't have this curtain separating us from the Holy of Holies, and that it's not only certain people who have access to God anymore. So that's one understanding of the symbolism for that. The other is that God has indeed truly 100% completely abandoned the temple, torn through the curtain and left. Some would say to be with the Son. Others would say just to dramatize and demonstrate that God has completely abandoned the temple, which, of course, by the time of Matthew has been destroyed. So it's the beginning of the end for the temple, the beginning of the fulfillment of the condemnation of the people and of Jesus. Now, those last couple of verses that we read, 55 and 56, many women were also there, looking on from a distance. Now, Matthew hasn't talked about these women, but apparently they had followed Jesus and provided for him. So these women who followed Jesus are there, but the men who followed Jesus are not. Matthew is reminding us about that, the fact that they had fled, dispersed, but not the women. The women come. Not only did they come, they came all the way from Galilee to be there and to be with Jesus, while the others left. Now, did they come from Galilee that night? That's actually impossible. They couldn't have gotten a flight on such short notice. No, they couldn't have gotten there like within those couple hours from Jesus' arrest. But Matthew is making it seem like they just showed up. They just got here, kind of thing. We don't know exactly who those women are, except for Mary Magdalene. The other Mary is confusing. It could be Mary, the mother of Jesus, but it's a very weird way of saying it. Why wouldn't he just say Jesus' mother? Last few verses, and then we're done for today. When it was evening, there came, and that's good because I need a drink. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. So Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn in the rock. He then rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb. End chapter 27. So a new character shows up, Joseph of Arimathea, who we don't know a lot about, except just what they tell us. He was not part of the religious establishment. Nowhere does it say that he was part of the Sanhedrin or anything. Nicodemus might have been. That's in John, which we could talk about some other time. But Joseph was not. And it says Joseph was a disciple. He's not referred to as a disciple in secret, as I think John calls him that. Somebody does. Matthew does not. He says he was a disciple. However, in this description, we can see that Joseph must have been a wealthy man. Must have been a wealthy man. Why do we say that? Um, because of a couple things in here. Uh, he had he had his own new tomb. He had his own new tomb. So a new tomb, unused, which he had hewn in the rock. In some translations, in some places, and maybe it's in a different book, I don't remember now. We think that Joseph hewed it himself, which really wouldn't make sense, because if he could afford this new tomb and have it hewn out, that makes a lot more sense. And he's rich. Now, also, he has a clean linen cloth. He doesn't have to go to buy one like one of the other story versions of the story says, which wouldn't make sense because it's Passover, shops would have been closed. Um, so he already has it, and he already has the cloth. He has this tomb, so we see indications that he was wealthy, which is quite possibly, if not probably, some of the congregational, some of the members of Matthew's own congregation. So this might have been a message, a word to them about uh, about being wealthy, and that it would be okay to be a disciple of Jesus while being wealthy and being a participant in everything. So, friends, that ends chapter 27. We will be back tomorrow with chapter 28. I promise it won't be an hour long session tomorrow. I do pray, though, that this has been beneficial to you, that you've learned or relearned something, that God has spoken to you in some way through what we've said and what we've read. As you go about your days, not just today, but every day, keep your eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, wide open to what our living, active, loving God is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, "Thank you, Papa," and then tell somebody about it. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed. Be blessed.